Thank you so much. Hi. So it is 23 years since what may be remembered as the final collapse of the peace process between Israel and the Palestinians, which finally collapsed at the desperate and unofficial Taba summit in January 2001. The Durban World Conference Against Racism took place in August that year, 2001. And the Al-Qaeda attacks on the World Trade Center in New York and the Pentagon and the White House in Washington, D.C. in September 2001. The campaign to exclude our Israeli academic colleagues from our universities, journals, and conferences around the world was made public the following spring. A letter was published in the Guardian newspaper on the 6th of April, signed by 123 academics, which called for a moratorium on European funding for Israeli universities. An opinion piece by Hillary and Stephen Rose was published in the same paper in July 2002, calling for a boycott of Israeli academic institutions. It appeared under the headline, "The choice is to do nothing or to try to bring about change," offering a false dichotomy that is so characteristic of this politics. There were always a huge number of things other than boycotting Israel that might have been done to help bring about peace between Israelis and Palestinians. Genuine solidarity is about finding what we, who are perhaps comfortable, can do to help them who are suffering. Solidarity begins there, not here, and it relates primarily to the needs of others. It is about offering material help. It should not be about using people far away and your own narratives of their stories to perform our own identities. In 2014 already, a student president in Ohio made a video of herself pouring a bucket of blood over her own head in order, she said, to send a message of student concern about genocide in Gaza, 2014. When we make solidarity, we should listen carefully and respectfully, but there is always a diversity of voices and positions to listen to. Solidarity must always also be a responsibility to engage and to think for ourselves. Solidarity changes us as it changes them. It is never genuinely passive or a one-way responsibility to, quote, answer a call or to obey those who speak in the name of the oppressed. Solidarity must be a relationship with people who are closer to the violence and the oppression than we are. It should be about fostering links, communication, confidence, and critical engagement between us and them, but also between them and them. Solidarity can also be simple and practical, sending books, teaching and speaking in Palestine and in Israel, working with Israelis and Palestinians, forging links between trade unions, academic bodies, universities, schools, and civil society. Genuine solidarity is about campaigning against violence and oppression, including racism and anti-Semitism. Solidarity with Israelis and Palestinians is about relating to the diversity within Israel and within Palestine, not treating each nation as a single monolith wrapped in a national flag. We who are far away from the violence, we who are professionally involved in the work of thinking things through coherently and in context, have a special responsibility to get things right, to think about the consequences of our actions, to be a force for good and a force for peace. The politics of boycott is to a large extent a not in my name politics, far away from the conflict, addressing the needs more of the boycotters than of those people closer to the danger. In much of the left, the politics of socialism, a positive, constructive project, has been replaced by the politics of resistance and of critique, a negative, symbolic enterprise concerned primarily with asserting innocence. It is also infantilizing insofar as it contents itself with opposition, often moralistic, often ineffectual. In their Guardian op-ed, Rose and Rose talk about boycott as a method of expressing moral outrage, as a way of shaming, and as ethical refusal. The effect of their false dichotomies, moral or not moral, ethical or shamed, do nothing or support the boycott or support Israel, is to divide the world into those who are with us and those who are against us, those who are inside the community of the good and those who put themselves outside of it by their immorality. Every rational person knows, they tell us, and what is self-evident is, and we tense, knowing we are somehow going to be constructed outside of the community of the rational. The Roses knew already the key arguments against their boycott, and they worked in advance to make them appear insignificant. The suggestion that their boycott of Israeli universities was comparable to the Nazi boycott of Jewish shops, they said, was grotesque. They did not quite say why, but they said it with confidence. They said such suggestions match hate emails accusing them of anti-Semitism, as though that was a reason. And they said, quote, if the supporters of the Israeli government cannot distinguish between being opposed to Israeli state policy and being anti-Semitic, it is scarcely surprising that real anti-Semites conflate the two. If supporters of the Israeli government cannot distinguish between being opposed to Israeli state policy and being anti-Semitic, it is scarcely surprising that real anti-Semites conflate the two. Notice how the Roses transfer the agency of what they call real anti-Semites, and they deftly transfer all responsibility for anti-Semitism onto Jews whose bad behavior they claim is the root cause of it. But they are also setting in stone the axiom that people who worry about anti-Semitism are supporters of the Israeli government. If you worry about anti-Semitism, say the anti-Zionists, then you must support the government. And if you support the government, then that is why you say you are worried about anti-Semitism. Good people, it follows, do neither, because worrying about anti-Semitism has been constructed as a lie told by people who support the Israeli government in order to delegitimize criticism of it. Later, I was to call this standard response to an allegation of anti-Semitism the Livingston formulation. From the beginning, the Livingston formulation is packaged in with the case for the exclusion of Israelis from our campuses. Anyone who does not support the exclusion is, from here onwards, to be recognized as a supporter of the Israeli government and as an apologist for its allegedly racist, apartheid, colonialist, Nazi evil. It was not until 18 long years later that the Equalities and Human Rights Commission reported in Britain on anti-Semitism in the Corbyn-led Labour Party, making it clear that amongst the things that constituted types of anti-Semitic conduct that amounted to unlawful harassment, things that constituted types of anti-Semitic conduct that amounted to unlawful harassment, one of which was, quote, suggesting that complaints of anti-Semitism are fake or smears. Labour Party agents denied anti-Semitism in the party and made comments dismissing complaints as smears or fake. This conduct may target Jewish members as deliberately making up anti-Semitism complaints to undermine the Labour Party, and it ignores legitimate and genuine complaints of anti-Semitism within the party. That's not an a priori judgment. It's a judgment based on their examination of the evidence of what was common in the Labour Party at the time. It is the relentless allegation of bad faith that makes Jews who speak up about anti-Semitism on the left into pariahs, people who are recognized as inauthentic on the left because their real allegiance is to the Israeli government, whoever that may be at any particular moment. And naturally, in response to its findings, the EHRC itself was denounced as a secret supporter of the Israeli government. The hashtag it was a scam still circulates in social media, referring to the suggestion that there was no issue of anti-Semitism in Corbyn's Labour Party and explaining the complaints about anti-Semitism as a conspiracy hatched by supporters of the Israeli government. Jeremy Corbyn himself lost the Labour whip. Later, he was expelled from the party since he responded on the very day of the publication of the EHRC report with rhetoric that could be interpreted as being structurally identical to that which the report had explicitly defined as amounting to unlawful harassment of Jews. Corbyn said, quote, "The scale of the problem was dramatically overstated for political reasons by our opponents inside and outside of the party, as well as by much of the media. Anti-Semitism is not rational and it is not true. It follows then that anti-Semitism can only be defended in ways that are extraneous to the claims it makes and to the forms it takes. Corbyn could not defend his record either by reference to what actually happened in the party under his leadership, because what actually happened is clear and it does not vindicate him. He cannot respond to what was actually said about him, about his supporters and about their politics, because what was said was true. In the end, all he can do is defend anti-Semitism by anti-Semitic means. That is, by reference to an unseen enemy that was so powerful that it succeeded in, quotes, dramatically overstating allegations that were not true, and in persuading the EHRC, the Jewish community, and enough of the electorate to believe these, quotes, dramatic overstatements. And crucially, because there were enough Jews inside the Labour Party who were lying about their experience of anti-Semitism in order to harm Corbyn politically. Because it is conspiracy fantasy, it is unfalsifiable and cannot be dented at all by any amount of evidence or argument. The leitmotif of the Livingston formulation, embedded inside the rhetoric of the boycott and of anti-Zionism itself, sits ready to delegitimize in advance any talk about anti-Semitism. And of course, that includes scholarship about anti-Semitism. The academic boycotters were rather candid about what they thought were the reasons for the defeat of their motions at AUT Council in 2003. Sue Blackwell said to the press, quote, "One of the reasons we didn't win was that there was no clear public call from Palestinians for the boycott. Now we have that in writing," she said. In 2016, Ilan Pappé responded to a claim from Ruba Salih that the boycott had been launched by the Palestinians in 2005. This discussion between the two is on a video on YouTube still. "Yes, yes," Pappé replies, making a face to show that he knows it is not true. "Yes, yes, not really, but yes. Okay, for the historical records, yes." Ruba Salih smiles at him and reiterates that's important. It's important to her that the Palestinians called for the boycott. And Pappé is saying, yes, yes, of course it's important, but it didn't happen. And he's right. Pappé replies to her, nodding and smiling, quite embarrassed, patronizingly, knowingly. It's not true, but it's important. Boycott, divestment, and sanctions does not come from Palestine in the way that it is often presented as a kind of authentic call from the oppressed. It was actually first pushed in London by academic anti-Zionists, and it was exported to Palestinian civil society organizations, real or imagined or partly imagined, from where it was then re-imported. The call had to come from, quote, civil society, because neither the Palestinian Authority nor even Hamas wanted to issue it. The Durban Conference of 2001 was a key source of the boycott call. There is a relationship between this boycott movement and the anti-Semitism from which it found itself quite unable to dissociate. In the first 2 decades of the 21st century, anti-Semitism emerged into the mainstream of British politics and culture, and not only British. The boycott campaign succeeded in gaining a foothold in the academic trade unions in Britain, in which a safe space for anti-Semitism was staked out and defended by a core of union activists and officials. The wider union membership and liberal and left opinion more generally allowed that to happen. An assumption is set up that the designation as Zionist applies to those Jews and other opponents of the boycott and its anti-Semitism who do not disavow the campaign or the state of Israel. Because we failed to stop the rise of this anti-Semitism in the academic unions, it spread. And as we had feared it would, it spread to the wider Labour movement and then into the Labour Party. Populist politics was on the rise in the 2010s, notably in Italy, France, Austria, Hungary, Poland, USA, Brazil, Turkey, Russia. This was the global context in which the Corbyn and the Brexit movements emerged in Britain, the former taking control of the Labour Party and the latter the Conservative Party. They presented each other's bitterest, they presented as each other's bitterest enemies, but they were in some ways similar. Each sought to focus popular anger against a liberal metropolitan establishment, which was accused of being connected more intimately to a global system of elites than to, quote, their own people. Both left and right populism fueled cynicism towards democratic institutions, cultures, and principles, and they offered charismatic leaders onto whom supporters could project their own diverse fantasies. Hostility to Zionism was as emblematic for Corbyn as hostility to ostensibly uncontrolled migration and to European institutions were for Johnson. The symbolic corrupting power of Zionism and of Europe, respectively, over British life functioned as a way of imagining and feeling the disloyalty of Britain's own elites to the authentic interests of the people. The Corbyn movement was defeated narrowly in June 2017 and decisively 2.5 years later, after years of parliamentary Brexit stalemate. Largely discredited and on the retreat from the Labour Party, the anti-Semitic component of the Corbyn movement regrouped and consolidated back on campus and on the fringes of the left, where it came from. It is possible that the apparent ebb of populism globally and in Britain might turn out to be temporary. There are significant numbers of activists and intellectuals in Britain who learnt that between us and progress sits Zionism and the institutions of the Jewish community and Zionist activists. There may also emerge openings on the right for anti-Semitism amongst people who have learnt that a cosmopolitan, educated, metropolitan, liberal elite stands between them and their own utopian and nostalgic vision of a great again Britain. Anti-Semitism, which plausibly appeared to be a spent and discredited force in the late 20th century, reignited in the 21st century. Yesterday in Britain, there was a real win for the opponents of populism, I think, with the election of a government pledged to sideline extravagant and emotional and aggressive conspiracy fantasy and instead to govern according to rational and democratic principles. It promises to try to make things a little better, to try not to let them get worse. It does not promise a heroic victory over the evil and hidden forces that stand between us and utopia. But it was only a battle that was won yesterday. It was not the war. Anti-Semitism was largely pushed out of the political structures of the Labour Party, but it has blossomed in wider society, especially since the 7th of October. Anti-Semitic thinking, as we heard this morning from everybody, is ever more normalized and respectable in society, and particularly in left and liberal spaces, the spaces upon which the Labour Party sits. Labour may be unable to make people feel that if they need an ambulance, then it will come quickly, or feel that their children are attending healthy communities of education when they go off to school. If Labour cannot make people feel that things are a little better than they have been, then the temptation of utopian fantasies will easily return, and populism will know how to construct the hidden enemy that sits between us and the good life.